Thank you, and please start.
Good evening. I want to thank the Commission once again for extending the invitation to the National Nurses United to discuss this important fiscal matter facing not only the Commission, but facing America. My name is Karen Higgins, and I am the co-president of the National Nurses United, and I'm an intensive care unit nurse for the past 33 years. National Nurses United is the largest nursing union in United States history. With 155,000 members and counting, we are concerned about any policy that affects our members and the patients that we serve. That is why everything on the table before this Commission is of great concerns to us. However, we believe that the promises that were made to the working Americans through Social Security and Medicare must be kept off the table. Medicare saves lives and is the nation's only single-payer program, saves money by eliminating wasteful insurance industry profits from the healthcare equation. That is why we believe expanding Medicare to everyone would be a positive impact on the economy in the long term. However, since we understand that Social Security is the most likely target for cuts, we intend to discuss why we actively campaign against such cuts. Social Security is the most successful social program in our nation's history. Without it, the poverty rate for seniors would jump from 10 to 48%. As a nurse on a daily basis in an intensive care unit, I have the misfortune of meeting a lot of seniors across in our community. And the problem is that what we're seeing is the seniors are struggling even with what they have for Social Security at this time. And they come in, and the issue is putting food on their table, putting roofs over their head, or paying for their medications as they struggle. And one of the things that we see them doing is not taking their medications and end up in the hospital in worse shape. And we see couples that are seniors that are basically one of the couple will give up their medications and not be taking care of themselves in order to help the other member, the one that needs more care and is struggling. And what we're seeing is then the healthy one ends up in the hospital and struggling. So as a nurse, this is huge, and to think that we would even see more cuts in Social Security is devastating. On a personal level, my mother, who is 82 years old, has been a widower since she was 45 years old, brought up 6 children, worked 2 to 3 jobs in order to do that, is now as a senior citizen living on an income of less than $12,000 a year. So it amazes me that we can think that anyone could live on even less than that. When people are living in poverty, it's bad for the economy, but people on Social Security live on the money that they receive and will help stimulate the economy. The money the general fund is borrowing from the trust fund belongs to our members. It belongs to the American people. It is a solemn and sacred promise to workers. We will not tolerate statements calling United States Treasury bonds issued to American citizens as worthless IOUs, when the same Treasury bonds are held by China and Japan, and they are obligations we wouldn't dare default on. Why then are they worthless if they are belonging to the American working families? And we feel this is a betrayal to all of us. Members of the Commission, as nurses, like many others, we can't afford cuts in Social Securities. We have fought hard for a middle-class, family-sustaining income, but we keep getting demands to gut our pension plans. Our 401 values plummeted during the economic decline. The so-called progressive price indexing would gut our remaining retirement security. The middle class is hurting enough, and we cannot take any more uncertainties or any more cuts. Raising the retirement age across the board is a benefit cut for us as nurses. Currently, about half of our bedside nurses are working with physical injuries that are related to our work from lifting, and a substantial of them are from lifting patients. We, as nurses, lift on average 1.8 tons every day. It's ludicrous to think a 70-year-old woman can lift 1.8 tons. OSHA reported that even the strongest workers can only lift about 30 pounds in the way that nurses lift patients. And nursing is considered ranked among the most dangerous jobs in America, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Finally, we are a female-dominated occupation, and as such, we are well aware that in our society, on average, women still earn 77 cents for every dollar a man earns, yet we live longer, we are more likely to take time out of the workplace, and we're more conservative investors than men, so women rely more heavily on Social Security. And studies have also shown at this point that elderly women are already more likely to be living in poverty without any cuts made now to Social Security. So in conclusion, members of the Commission, you must keep cuts of Social Security and Medicaid off the table. National Nurses United is part of the 13 million members of the AFL-CIO will be going to Congress with that message. We intend to collect promises from members that the government will
Thank
keep
you very
its
much.
promises to us. Thank you for this opportunity.
Let me ask the remaining panelists to please keep your comments to 4 minutes, if you would.
Thank you.
Chairman Bowles, Chairman Simpson, distinguished members of the Commission, on behalf of Paralyzed Veterans of America and the millions of men and women who have honorably served in this nation's armed forces, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here today to present some comments on the Department of Veterans Affairs and the programs with which it administers. My name is Carl Blake. I am the National Legislative Director for Paralyzed Veterans of America. It is no secret that this country faces a very harsh reality when it comes to our fiscal future. Rapid growth in federal spending, coupled with an economic downturn that has secondarily impacted federal revenues, has set us on a course that appears unsustainable. And yet PVA is here today to emphasize why continued growth in federal spending for the programs managed by the VA is imperative. While such a position seems to fly in the face of deficit hawks who want to slash all federal spending, VA is unlike most federal programs that are being considered. Ultimately, the most important point to make is that both the discretionary accounts within the VA and the mandatory accounts support programs that are an earned benefit provided by the VA to veterans. These programs were not paid into like many social welfare programs, and they are not managed as annuitized benefits like many of those same programs. The price for veterans' health care and benefits was paid by the service and sacrifice of the men and women who have served this nation in uniform. To recommend that in the interest of fiscal responsibility, that veterans' benefits should be reduced serves only to degrade the value of the service provided by a veteran. Moreover, it suggests that this country is not wholly obligated to provide health care and benefits to the men and women who have served and who continue to serve even today. We also remain concerned that cuts in any of the programs administered by the VA will have a direct and immediate impact on veterans and their families. To recommend that discretionary funding for VA health care programs be reduced would mean that without question, the VA would have to cut the number of veterans it will serve or reduce the services it will provide. Additionally, any recommendation to reduce compensation payments paid to veterans for injuries sustained in defense of this country simply suggests that while the United States is sorry for the grievous wounds incurred in service, it has to limit its obligation to veterans because it cannot afford to compensate them for their sacrifices. Such a consideration is simply unconscionable. We offer without equivocation that no one in this country would support such a notion, and we urge the Commission not to support such a suggestion as well. PVA also believes that a viable VA healthcare system provides relief to an overloaded private healthcare system and actually saves this country money on healthcare spending. The Veterans Health Administration is the largest direct provider of healthcare services in the nation. In fact, in the current fiscal year alone, the VA is expected to have more than 8 million veterans enrolled and provide direct service to nearly 6 million veterans. And yet it is widely regarded as the most cost-effective and cost-efficient healthcare system in the nation. It sets the standards for quality and efficiency, and it does so at or below Medicare rates, while serving a population of veterans that is older, sicker, and has a higher prevalence of mental health and related problems. Were funding for this myriad of programs to be reduced, this patient population would simply track into the higher-cost private healthcare world at a much greater expense to federal programs that also provide for their needs. Mr. Chairman, once again, I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to advocate for the protection of the Department of Veterans Affairs in efforts to reset the fiscal course of this country. The VA supports a veterans population which has already carried a heavy burden for this country. These men and women certainly cannot expect to further add to this burden. I thank you again for the opportunity to submit my statement, and I'll be happy to provide any additional information that you might request.
Thank you. Are you a veteran?
Yes, sir, I am.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Simpson, Mr. Bowles, members of the Commission, thank you for taking time to listen to the public today. My name is Gary Thurkelson. I'm a federal fiscal policy analyst with OMB Watch, who I'm representing here today. Founded in 1983, OMB Watch is an independent, nonpartisan watchdog organization that advocates for government accountability and transparency and citizen participation in governmental processes. OMB Watch recognizes the dangers posed by the unsustainability of the long-term fiscal outlook. However, the current atmosphere of deficit scaremongering poses a different danger, poor fiscal policy that ultimately harms Americans and does nothing to change the trajectory of the long-term budget situation. Fiscal responsibility is not simply setting arbitrary limits on federal spending for the sake of reducing the federal budget deficit. Rather, it is an assessment of the current economic and fiscal environments and a determination of an equitable deployment of national resources. 10.7 million Americans are without work right now, and millions more work part-time because they have no other choice. The Office of Management and Budget projects that until 2015, unemployment will remain above 6% and will stay above 5% through 2020. All else being equal, reducing the federal budget deficit in the near term will only worsen the situation. In short, yes, deficits can be good things, and fiscal responsibility requires the Commission to acknowledge this. Cutting federal spending during a recession is fiscally irresponsible for two reasons. First, either by scaling back programs that provide health care, nutrition, and housing services that soften the blows of the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, or by crippling institutions that protect the public from tainted food and lead-contaminated toys, spending cuts now and in the next few years will inflict undue hardship on millions of American families. Second, reducing the federal budget deficit may, as it did in 1937, stifle a nascent recovery that's barely underway. A resultant double-dip recession would keep many from re-entering the workforce and further suppress federal tax receipts, ultimately exacerbating the deficit situation. Federal spending is a powerful counter-cyclical tool that can help put people to work and increase consumer spending. Given the anemic growth and persistently high unemployment projected over the next 3 years, and with state budget crises still looming, the Commission should seriously consider a second large stimulus. The Recovery Act has generated between 1.2 million and 2.8 million jobs, according to the Congressional Budget Office. A new stimulus package would help the economy expand by putting more people back to work and increasing revenues, thus allowing short-term deficits, which are largely, though not totally, self-correcting, to come down faster. Put in stark terms, we either increase the deficit or we increase unemployment. OMB Watch favors increasing the deficit in the short term, as higher employment will help to ensure the deficit is temporary. Once unemployment moves down and the economy is less fragile, then and only then should we tackle the structural deficits that remain. I have two final comments on the options available to reduce the federal budget deficit. First, the Commission should consider tax expenditures to be the same as expenditures that occur through cash outlays. In other words, when spending cuts or freezes are called for, tax expenditures should be considered part of that universe of spending. Syracuse University professor and former head of the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, Len Berman, estimates that freezing tax expenditures at 2012 levels for 3 years and indexing the cap for inflation after that would save the Treasury about $3.5 trillion. The $250 billion deficit reduction resulting from a decade-long freeze of non-security discretionary spending is a pittance compared to the savings found in freezing tax expenditures. Second, without a comprehensive view of federal spending and its impact, the Commission and other federal budget makers will not be able to weigh all possible approaches to deficit reduction. Currently, there is no single source of federal spending information. There is no dashboard of spending to which policymakers can turn to see the universe of federal policy initiatives, the money spent on each, and the ultimate impact those programs have on Americans. Once authorized, such a federal spending transparency system will take several years to design and implement and would, of course, not be available to this Commission. However, a recommendation to create such a system would prove invaluable to budget makers in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we are looking very closely at tax expenditures, believe me. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Ashley Carson. I'm the Executive Director of the Older Women's League and our campaign, socialsecuritymatters.org. Thank you, Chairman Bowles and Chairman Simpson and Dr. Rivlin for inviting us here to speak tonight. A critical part of economic security for women, especially older women, is Social Security. There's a great deal of concern among women of all ages that this commission will recommend cuts in Social Security. I know you've said that any benefit cuts will not affect current beneficiaries or those nearing retirement, but it will affect the generations to come. It's not only older women who are concerned about the fate of older women in America. It's all women. If this commission is truly here to protect future generations, our daughters and granddaughters, it will not act to leave them worse off than our grandmothers are today. Unfortunately, cuts to Social Security will do just that. In the same way the public rejected privatization in 2005, they reject any notion of cuts to Social Security, either by further raising the retirement age or by reducing benefits. We know it's our money, and all generations expect the government to keep its promise. The reality of the situation is that most female retirees are not driving expensive cars and living in gated communities. However, the faith in the American dream has us all believing that that will be our fate. Right now, nearly half of women 65 plus who live alone are poor. While the average Social Security benefit is $13,800, women receive about $2,000 less on average. It's above poverty, but barely. $11,800 is not enough to survive on, and for a growing number of older women, it's all they have. It's less than $1,000 a month to pay their rent and to pay for everything else they may need. Women face an incredible confluence of circumstances in retirement. First, women are paid less for the same work as their male counterparts. This adds up to hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. This means they have fewer dollars to save for retirement, less money contributed into Social Security, and less money at the end of each month to put away for retirement. Women spend years out of the paid workforce caring for children, an aging parent, a spouse, or other loved ones, and sometimes all of them at the same time. Women receive no pay for this time and are not credited in Social Security. Further, women are more likely to work in part-time positions, which often do not offer retirement benefits and result in lower take-home pay. Finally, women live longer, which means we have to make our money stretch out and last longer. Cutting Social Security won't remedy these problems, it will only exacerbate them. Adjustments to Social Security's retirement age sound to non-experts like a work incentive or an appropriate adjustment for longer, healthier lives, when it is simply an across-the-board benefit cut, albeit disguised, which falls heaviest on those who are in physically demanding jobs or who find themselves laid off and unable to find employment. While an economist, lawyer, or member of Congress may find it easy to delay retirement, the same cannot be said for auto workers, coal miners, nursing assistants, and housekeepers. Due to the changing workforce, unemployment later in life, and the vast increase in age discrimination claims, it's clear that raising the retirement age for Social Security is not a viable option for the American people. Numerous studies have documented that improvements in life expectancy, including life expectancy in retirement, have been skewed in favor of those with higher incomes and more education. For men, most of the improvements in life expectancy in recent decades have occurred among the higher income and more educated, with lower income and less educated men seeing little or no change. In the case of women, overall life expectancy has stagnated, with lower income women seeing declines in life expectancy and upper income more educated women seeing modest improvements. If we're going to be more fiscally responsible and rein in our
Can you
deficit—
try to wrap up, please? Thank you.
Yes, sir. We need to look at the causes of our deficit and fix those first. Americans are quite willing to address the problems, but Social Security isn't one of them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very, very much. Thank all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next group, please. Yeah. Thank you very much, and you can go ahead and start.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I'm Virginia Reno. I'm Vice President for Income Security at the National Academy of Social Insurance. We have over 800 members in our organization, and each are experts in their field, and each speaks for him or herself. My remarks today will focus on Social Security and draw on two recent reports that we have come out with. The first is a poll of America's views on Social Security. Our second is a report on we call Fixing Social Security. It has policy options and cost estimates for about 30 ways to improve Social Security's finances, to balance its finances, and about a dozen ways to improve the adequacy of benefits for vulnerable and low-income groups. I have just a few key points I want to make in our short time today. First, Social Security is affordable. As a share of the economy, it will rise from just under 5% of the entire economy now to about just over 6% when all boomers are retired, and it will remain about 6% of the economy for the rest of the next 75 years. It's clear a 1% increase in the share of the economy is highly affordable. Second, Americans depend on Social Security heavily. As others have said, without it, nearly half of our elders would be poor, but it's also a bedrock of security for the broad middle class. Third, Americans value Social Security, as our poll report finds. They say they would rather pay more for it than see benefits cut. Our poll found that Americans say they value it for themselves, for their families, and quite frankly, for the stability it provides to millions of other people. This was true in the responses from Republicans, Democrats, and independents. The Americans also said they support improving benefits in modest ways for vulnerable groups. In our Fixing Social Security report, there are several options that would target benefit improvements for particularly vulnerable groups. They include long service, low-paid workers, widows of low-income couples, and children of deceased workers who want to go to college but have lost parental support that would enable them to do so. So how could we fix Social Security? Well, I think it is useful to think about this problem as a problem of revenue shortfall, and a revenue shortfall that is not now but out in the distant future. We need a 75-year revenue plan to match our 75-year forecast of the future of this program. Through most of its history, Social Security has had tax increases scheduled out in the future, but that has not been the case since 1990. Policymakers could act now to schedule FICA rate increases out somewhere in that future between now and 75 years from now to keep the system in balance. I'd like to mention 3 options quickly from our report that would move us in that direction. First, one could broaden the base by lifting the cap on earnings that are subject to taxes, get it back to covering 90% of wages as it did in the past. Second, we could broaden the tax base by treating all salary reduction plans, or so-called flexible spending accounts, like we treat 401k plans. What does that mean? That means they would become subject to FICA taxes, but would remain exempt from income taxes. Both of these base broadening changes are consistent with past congressional intent, and both could improve the fairness of the system.
I must ask you to stay within the 4 minutes because we've been here since 1 and we're going to stay till we're
I'm
finished.
done.
Please, no.
I will. The last point is, with this base broadening, modest FICA rate increases in the distant future, out 12 years, 40 years, could put the system in balance. The result would be assuring workers that they will have the benefits that they hope to receive, and it is consistent with what the American people say they want. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Simpson, my name is Frank Restley, and I'm here as a representative of the 8+ million people who have lost their jobs during this recession. I speak on my own behalf and from my own experience and knowledge. In 1978, Representative Augustus Hawkins and Senator Hubert Humphrey co-authored the Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act. The 4 goals of that act were full employment, growth in production, price stability, and balance of trade and budget. That act was allowed to expire in the year 2000. The Federal Reserve still submits yearly Humphrey-Hawkins testimony to Congress and is still ultimately responsible for price stability. But Congress, the U.S. Treasury Department, and the presidency have neglected their parts in achieving these goals for too long. The data that I present to you comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the St. Louis Federal Reserve. From the year 2000 to present, U.S. employment for manufacturing durable goods has shrank from 10.8 million people to 7.1 million people. And non-durable goods manufacturing employment has shrank from 6.4 million to 4.5 million. Total employment in the production of goods has shrank from 24.6 million to 17.9 million. This represents a net loss of 6.7 million jobs. This is not a cyclical phenomenon. This is a structural change brought about by a government that has ignored principles set forth by its own members over 30 years ago. If you wanted to look at one thing to observe this lack of principle, you would look at the price of gold. From 2002 to present, the price of gold in dollars has gone from $300 an ounce to over $1,200 an ounce. Some people look at gold as an inflation hedge. I look at it as a government screw-up hedge. And there have been too many screw-ups to tolerate since Humphrey Hawkins was thrown in the wastebasket. What must change to get back to the spirit of Humphrey Hawkins' Act? I'll start with number 3, price stability. To achieve price stability in the United States, the auction yields on all maturities of debt sold by the government must be at least 2% above the current year-over-year change in the Consumer Price Index for all urban customers as published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Federal Reserve and other market players may adjust market rates as they see fit, but the federal government must never again use lower interest costs as a means of lower deficits. I believe that the federal government must begin selling forward-year tax receipts, also known as FIDERs, to augment the interest deductions already set forth by congressional statute, which include mortgage interest payment and corporate interest payment. A forward-year tax receipt, also known as FIDER, is a receipt sold by the U.S. Treasury Department for taxes paid today that are due sometime in the future. Like U.S. Treasury bills and bonds, FIDERs would have a rate of appreciation and a duration. However, unlike Treasury bonds that guarantee payment in cash to the owner at maturity, the owner of the FIDER must have the tax liability to be offset when the FIDER reaches maturity. If the value of the FIDER at maturity exceeds the tax liability of the owner, then the owner would receive from the Treasury the difference in the form of additional FIDERs. The rate of appreciation for the longest duration of FIDER must always be set by the Treasury Secretary with the explicit goal of maintaining full employment in the United States. Obviously, everyone knows about China's trade deficit with us and their purchase of Treasury bills and bonds. This presents a conflict between monetary policy and fiscal policy. Interest rates on government debt can't rise to contain inflation. To rectify this, the normal way is to ask China to revalue the currency, but that's completely up to them. I suggest instead that we lower the after-tax cost of private capital formation in the United States by selling FIDERs. Thank you.
I thank you very much, very much, Mr. Wesley. Now, please.
Thank you, Chairman and staff, for this opportunity and for your time and attention. I'm Dr. Margaret Flowers, and I'm speaking on behalf of Physicians for National Health Program. We are the leading physician education, research, and advocacy organization for a national single-payer system in the U.S. I want to comment briefly on the contribution of healthcare costs to our deficit, some evidence-based remedy for that, and I did submit written testimony with some backup information, so I hope that you'll have an opportunity to look at that. In terms of healthcare, and comparing our nation to others around the world, we're number one in only one area, which is that we spend the most per capita per year on healthcare. And for this, we get very poor value on return. We have about a third of our population that is either uninsured or underinsured, leaving them financially vulnerable to bankruptcy and foreclosure should they have an illness. In addition, for the healthcare dollar, we have poor health outcomes. We're ranked 37th in the world, and we have the highest number of preventable deaths of the industrialized nations, which is about estimated a few years ago to be 100,000 preventable deaths per year in this nation. Healthcare costs are a leading contributor to our deficit, currently rising at 2.5% faster than our GDP. And unfortunately, the legislation which was recently passed, PPACA, is actually estimated to increase our healthcare costs more than if we had done nothing at all, while still leaving tens of millions of our people with nothing. The other point that I wanted to make is that if we actually spent per capita what the other industrialized nations spent, we would be seeing a budget surplus in this nation right now. There may be a temptation, given the rising cost of health care, to cut our social insurance programs, Medicaid and Medicare. I urge you not to do this. It would be a mistake. Medicare has reduced poverty among our elderly by over 60%. In addition, Medicare, the administrative costs of Medicare are rising more slowly than that with private health insurance, and we would see worsened health outcomes if we were to take away these programs. We know that data shows that once our population reaches the age of 65, we start to see a decrease in health disparities. So it would be important not to raise that any higher. I wanted to just make the point that Medicare and Medicaid are not the cause of our health care cost crisis. It's really, they're the victims of using a fragmented and experimental market-based model of financing our health care. It's not possible to take health care costs off of our public, social programs and shift them onto the individual and expect that they're magically going to become sustainable or go away. So we advocate for a national single-payer or improved Medicare for all system. This is the only type of system that has built-in cost controls, and I outline those in my remarks of global budgeting, negotiation for prices, negotiating pharmaceutical costs, being able to recognize outliers, being able to allocate our health resources on a rational basis instead of a profit basis. We would also see some benefits to business, reducing the burden of health care costs on our small businesses, creating a more healthy and productive workforce, increasing our competition in the global market. And we also see a benefit to families in terms of having more discretionary income to spend on things other than health care, more security, not having to make decisions between paying for medication and care or paying for other necessities in their life like food and shelter. Given the multiple benefits that I've outlined in my remarks, it's no surprise that the majority of the public and physicians favor a national single-payer health system, and you saw this recently on Saturday with the America Speaks events when the public did demand, and I was at the one in Detroit, the single-payer be an option, and 71% of the participants voted to make no cuts to our Medicaid and Medicare. So in closing, Medicare for all saves lives, it saves money. We urge you as a commission to make this recommendation. We have the ability to have the best health care system in the world, and we look for you to do that.
Thank you very much. Good evening, co-chairs and staff. Thank you very much for your stamina. I'll be as brief as I can. I provide written testimony. My name is Kevin Zeese with ProsperityAgenda.us. Before considering any cuts in Social Security and Medicare, these country's most important social programs that every American will rely on for their health and well-being, the Commission should focus on where wealth has been concentrated, as well as the misspent discretionary spending. To do so means confronting the true sources of debt, 2 wars fought on borrowed money, uncontrolled military spending, hundreds of billions in corporate welfare, tax cuts for the wealthiest and corporations, as well as deregulation of banks that led to the need for bailouts. The wealth divide is now at its widest point since the 1920s. This funneling of wealth occurred because of policies that funneled wealth to the top. In fact, during this most recent expansion from 2002 to 2007, the top 1% captured 2/3 of income growth. To balance this, the Commission needs to go where the money is. As a result, a more fair tax on the wealthiest is important. The funneling of wealth to the top was due to taxpayer subsidies, tax breaks, and corporate welfare to concentrated corporate interests and tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans. This is a major source of the national debt. From 2001 to 2008, tax cuts for the wealthy cost the U.S. Treasury $700 billion, all right to the national debt. There are 7,500 households in the United States with annual incomes over $20 million. Over the last 2 decades, this group has paid less in taxes. The top 400 has seen their tax brackets plummet from 51% in 1955 to 16% in 2007. The most recent year statistics are available. A tax on the wealthiest could raise $105 billion, and they wouldn't even feel it. 100 years ago, Teddy Roosevelt suggested that we need to focus on concentrating wealth by dealing with the graduated inheritance tax. The failure to have an estate tax in 2010 will cost an estimated $14.8 billion. I urge this Commission to endorse the Responsible Estate Tax Act so we can raise billions of dollars while exempting 99.75% of Americans from paying any estate tax. This Commission should also look at a tax on financial speculation. A modest tax on financial transactions could easily raise more than $150 billion a year. A 0.5% tax on stocks and trades, a 0.02% tax on futures, derivatives, and default swaps would have almost impact on investors. The United Kingdom has raised $40 billion by just taxing stock trades. We could raise over $150 billion a year. Regarding cuts in discretionary spending, most discretionary spending, in fact, more than half, goes to war and weapons. The Commission must look at this budget if it's going to find a way to control our fiscal problems. One challenge you face is that DoD budget is unauditable. You should require a way to make sure that this budget is auditable, and the Commission should recommend reforms so we know what the money is being spent on. In 2008, the General Accounting Office found that we were $300 billion in overruns on weapons spending. Just by not allowing cost overruns on these contracts, we would save significant resources. And of course, 2 wars being fought on borrowed money, costing us trillions of dollars. The Afghan war with $1 million per soldier, to keep 1 soldier in Afghanistan for 1 year, costing $7 billion a month, needs to be reconsidered. And 1,000 military bases and outposts also need to be looked at. Regarding, let me move on to corporate welfare. This is an area where hundreds of billions of dollars a year is spent. We don't even know how much is spent on corporate welfare, and we continue to spend it. This needs to be looked at. How much is being spent? Some is being spent on when you're seeing record profits in the oil and gas industry. Tens of billions of dollars are being spent in that area. On Social Security and Medicare, this is an area that really can't be cut. In fact, they need to be expanded. People are going to be living in poverty in their retirement, especially with the drop in the stock market. We've seen people lose their savings, and they need Social Security. It has a surplus, it's a contract with Americans, and can't be broken. On Medicare, if we control health costs, we control the future deficit. The only way to control deficits and debt is to control health care costs. The only way to control health care costs is to expand and improve Medicare so it covers all Americans. It's the private insurance industry that's causing so much waste. We would save $400 billion a year by going to a Medicare for all, single-payer system. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate that greatly. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You'd have the next group, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to apologize for my informal shoes. We have a broken foot dog out of control situation going on, so please excuse my informality. Chairman Bowles and Chairman Simpson and distinguished members and staff, of course, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this critical conversation. My name is Nicole Tishon, and I represent the U.S. Public Interest Research Group. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan public interest advocacy group, and we represent all of our state organizations and our citizen members across the country. Our perspective on reducing the debt and deficit is founded on the principle of accountability for tax dollars, whether the recipient is a government agency, its contractors, or the industries that benefit from taxpayer bailouts. We've released 2 reports to reduce the deficit through policies that not only advance the public interest, but also reduce the deficit. The first trillion report we released was back when the Commission first started its work, and the next trillion report was released today across the country in conjunction with this hearing. The reports, which are available on our website at uspirg.org, we focus on 5 areas for deficit reduction. 1 is reducing wasteful spending on contracts and supplies. 2, making polluters and financial speculators pay for the damage they create. 3, ending wasteful corporate subsidies. 4, better collecting existing taxes. And 5, reducing costs to administer Medicare. I'll highlight some of these examples from our most recent report, which, like the Commission, looks at a debt reduction horizon of 2015. So category 1, reducing wasteful spending on contracts and supplies. Much of what the government does is through private contractors, so it makes sense to root out waste within government purchasing and contracts. We've seen a lot of common ground across the political spectrum to do so. We applaud the administration's recent efforts to snuff out bad contractors and wasteful contracts, especially within the IT framework. We also applaud the efforts of the Bipartisan Deficit Acquisition Panel to make sure that the Pentagon spends dollars more carefully and pays for services and programs that provide the best value. As a former contractor For the federal and state government, myself, I can personally attest to the amount of time and money that's wasted when requirements are not accurately collected, when rules aren't adhered to, or when projects are not closely managed. In examining the purchasing and inventory data of the Defense Logistics Agency, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, GAO discovered that these organizations were wasting billions of dollars purchasing items that went unused or were never required, as much as 50% or more. Category 2, making polluters and financial speculators pay for the damage they create. We believe that when polluters and speculators make a mess for the public, they should be responsible for cleaning it up. And for risky activities, the best way to do this is to create an insurance fund that will be ready when the need arises. We've seen the result of irresponsible risk-taking in the Gulf. We've seen it on Wall Street time and time again. One of the biggest problems we see is speculative high-volume transactions driven by computerized hair-trigger trades seeking relatively small margins. Just yesterday, the trading of Citibank was suspended due to such trading. Support for this tax comes far and wide, including global leaders, Nobel laureates, Warren Buffett, and a broad coalition of consumer, labor, environmental, human rights, and other organizations. Most importantly, it's supported by the taxpayers. In today's Wall Street Journal, we saw that participants in national town hall meetings that were put together with assistance from a broad spectrum of groups, including AEI, the Concord Coalition, and the Chamber of Commerce. This resulted in a resounding 61% of the participants supporting such a tax. I have a couple more comments on ending wasteful subsidies.
If you could wrap up, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. Getting rid of gas and oil subsidies, closing the carried interest loophole, ending the use of offshore tax havens for tax avoidance and evasion, which could end up in collecting $500 billion by 2015, and reducing the cost to administer Medicare through technology and making sure that we get the best possible deal for taxpayers. We just basically want to say that regardless of the urgency of our debt situation, the government needs to move forward with an aggressive plan to hold
Thank you
itself
very much.
accountable.
Thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Mary Kay, thank you for being here, and most of all, thank you for giving us Andy Stern. He's
Oh,
been a
it's
great
our
member.
great pleasure and honor to give you Andy Stern. He is an incredible leader, and I think will make a huge contribution to this commission. So thank you. I understand that the commission has received our testimony, and I thought rather than making the case about the current crisis for working people, I would just go directly to the recommendations and highlight them at the end of the evening. As I was preparing, I thought about the 2.2 million members we represent and how they think about the year 2015 and their own ability to balance their income with their increasing debt and the debt that their children are incurring to get to college. And we look forward to this commission allowing the country to have an honest conversation about what caused the economic crisis that led directly to our deficit, and that this crisis was caused by 30 years of failed economic policies, cutting taxes for the rich, which we believe has deepened economic inequality to levels not seen before the Great Depression, and that slashing regulations that provided for 50 years of financial market stability led directly to the collapse of our financial markets, and in the process destroyed $17 trillion in wealth. We believe these outcomes were not accidents, that they were the unavoidable consequence of policy decisions. In fact, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the tax cuts enacted under President Bush, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the economic downturn together virtually explain the entire deficit over the next 10 years. Two of those policies, tax cuts and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, account for nearly $7 trillion in deficits between 2009 and 2019. The point is there is no crisis of entitlement spending, and that means there's no reason to cut Social Security. Second, SEIU wants to state unambiguously that pursuing budget balance prematurely while the economy is weak risks creating another recession. And even more importantly, if we balance the budget but leave a fifth of our workforce sitting on the sidelines, we have failed. There is no economic or long-term security with unemployment in the double digits. So as unpopular as it might be in this conversation, we need to recognize that more spending now will create good jobs, strengthen our economy, and put us on the path to sustainable deficit reduction. If we choose the other path and start to reduce the deficit now, we risk a poorer and more divided society over the long run and an even greater danger in the short term, a deep recession that will ultimately only make our deficit problems worse. Third, some on this commission have said that everything should be on the table. We disagree. Cuts in Social Security should not be on the table. Given the fact that half of working Americans have no retirement benefits through their work and that pension funds were devastated by the financial crisis, any conversation about Social Security must begin with the question of whether Social Security provides an adequate level of benefits and whether Social Security is adequate for the working poor. And I just wanted to pause here and talk about the 700,000 home care providers that we represent that on average earn between $14,000 and $20,000 a year, and the family child care providers, 200,000 of whom labor in 7 states and also earn about that same amount. None of those workers can look forward to a Social Security recheck when they retire, nor have any hope of being able to retire with dignity and face a choice of either working until they drop or living in poverty as they age. And that seems to me a focus that this commission should look at in terms of how do we provide adequate Social Security benefits for the people that I would submit are doing their best to make ends meet by working hard for a living and just need a fair shake. So what we think it should be on the table is adequacy and fairness. Once we get the economy growing again, we will need to raise additional revenue and find the right balance to a sound fiscal policy, which means that all spending must be on the table, including our defense budget. America has become a much more unequal society. Between 1979 and 2007, the average after-tax income for the top 1% rose by 281%. So we think being able to raise additional revenue, we should be sure to tax those who have benefited by enacting a financial transaction tax and other tax increases on the very wealthy, which could generate several $100 billion a year in revenue. So I call on the members of this commission to see your mission in its broadest terms. Please judge your success in achieving the 2015 goal of primary budget balance, not just by where we stand as a nation, but where we stand as a collection of citizens, of working families that make up America. If family budgets are sound, if we have decent jobs, if homes are not under the threat of foreclosure, and we have the ability to retire with security, then I believe you will have succeeded in answering our call. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. When I was thanking you for Andy, I should have also thanked you for Lila.
Oh.
She's been an enormous help to us.
Great.
Thank
Fabulous.
you very much.
Indeed.
To the chairman and members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to testify you today. My name is Michael Fisher, Jr., and I'm a public policy advocate in the Washington office of the United Church of Christ, Justice, and Witness Ministries. My colleague, Dr. Edith Rassel, an economist in our Cleveland office, and I also submitted written testimony. As with any good sermon, we bring a 3-point message. But I will begin by summarizing the painful and debilitating situation in which many families find themselves today. And you've heard these statistics. 1 in 8 people is on food stamps, including 1 in 4 children. 1 in 9 families cannot make the minimum payments on their credit cards. 1 in 7 mortgages is in default or foreclosure. And over 1/4 of the unemployed are facing foreclosure or eviction. In total, 44% of households have experienced either job loss or reduction in hours. As we know, nearly 1 in 10 workers is unemployed. But even this grim statistic fails to fully describe the burden on our families. Joblessness is not distributed equally across demographic groups, but falls most heavily on people of color, young workers, and those without a college degree. For these individuals, unemployment and underemployment have reached levels that recall the Great Depression. In addition, to the financial effects, the social and emotional impacts of and underemployment have created a mental health epidemic. While some feel hopeful and eager for a new start, the majority is stressed, depressed, angry, and feeling hopeless. For some people and communities, recovery will take many years. For others, the effects will persist for a lifetime. For millions of people of all ages, the whole and holy life that is God's vision for each of us has been lost, at least for a while. I cite these distressing statistics to remind us that as long as our economy remains weak, the recovery uncertain, and employment high, our nation's primary concern must be to create jobs and get people back to work. Therefore, our first recommendation to the Commission is to maintain the federal deficit. This must take precedence over deficit reduction. When the economy is once again on sound footing, then we will need to substantially reduce the deficit. Until then, however, a large deficit is necessary to promote a strong economic recovery and reduce the unacceptably high and destructive level of unemployment. Moreover, a strong economy is a prerequisite for future deficit reduction. Second, over the long term, additional revenues must be found. The 2001 and 2003 tax cuts for those with incomes over $250,000 must be allowed to sunset at the end of the year. In the short term, this additional revenue should be used to stimulate the economy. But once this downturn is behind us, the added revenues will contribute to deficit reduction. Third, the long-term deficit is largely driven by the cost of health care. The high and rising costs threaten both the physical health of every individual and the fiscal health of our nation. Small steps towards cost containment were made in the health insurance reform bill enacted in March, but much more needs to be done. We hope the Commission will make health care cost containment a major focus of your work, and we thank you for this opportunity to testify before you today.
Thank you very much, and I assure you we will. Before we hear from John Satterjee, I just want to say that when I had the privilege of heading the Small Business Administration, and I came up here as the biggest neophyte you've ever seen. Nobody was more helpful to me than John was in small business. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity. My name is John Satterjee, and I am with the Small Business Legislative Council. Just a few quick points. First is, obviously, we, as most in the business community, believe we need to bring the deficit down, and we need to start now. I haven't met a small business owner that would warmly embrace a tax increase. That's just not going to happen. We recognize that that's the case. And so I think about one thing that I can share that perhaps is a little different insight into the process, and it's why small business gets involved in these activities in the wrong way. And typically 9 out of 10 times, particularly on the tax side, it is that you pick a threshold and you say, you know what, 99% of the small businesses will be okay. And the example would be, for example, the marginal rate. If you pick $250,000. On the estate tax, you put $3.5 million exemption. And everybody says small business doesn't care. Well, they care, and they typically for 3 reasons I see. You get those businesses that are there that are the growing businesses that are close to the 250,000 or the 3.5. Those are the ones that create the jobs. Those are the ones you want to help. Second, it drives to bad business policy. How many times do folks avoid estate tax by dividing the business in various ways that do not make sense? And third, there isn't a small business in America who doesn't think, you know what, I can make $250,000. I can get there. Or I can get to an estate of $3.5 million, and I want to do that. So those are the reasons why typically we react negatively to things that are a little too close to us. And so my recommendation is, can we find something that doesn't take it as close? And just the other day, Senator Sanders introduced an estate tax reform bill. And it's what I would call an aggressive, progressive estate tax. It starts at $3.5 million as the bottom exemption. The top rate for him is at a $500 million estate. The top rate will be 65%. It'll be a 55% tax plus a 10% surge tax. And I just wonder if he took the number from 3.5 to 10 million, what he would have to do in the other brackets to take care of that and take small business out of that particular debate. And my guess is it could probably be reached in an easier way than we think. So if it's going to come to that, we know we're going to share the pain along with everybody else. But if we get it to the point where small businesses aren't saying, you know, this is right on my target list, then I think we're going to ease some of that pain of sharing the pain. So my recommendation is when you get looking at a threshold, ask yourself once, well, can we take it up one notch higher, and what will we have to do somewhere else, and can we get there? So that's my one recommendation. Perhaps that's a little different than everybody else. Wish you the best of luck, and we plan to do everything we can do to help you all. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next group. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chairman Bowles and Chairman Simpson. I appear here in two capacities. I'm the co-director of Social Security Works, but I'm also was the former top aide to Alan Greenspan in his capacity as chair of the so-called Greenspan Commission.
And you did a fabulous job. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful experience. Now, press reports assert that this commission's recommendations will be taken up in the lame duck session without the benefit of full hearings, open markups, or opportunity for amendment. If this is true, this would be unprecedented with respect to Social Security, including in 1983, and indeed unwarranted. Throughout Social Security's long history, Congress has always used the normal legislative process when considering Social Security. Another almost unprecedented action is discussing Social Security in the context of overall budget deficit discussions. Indeed, Congress has historically and appropriately worked very hard to keep the mandatory Social Security contributions of American workers, their employers, and the related income clearly distinct and separate from the federal government's general fund and related budget. Social Security's monies are segregated in a trust apart from the general fund. The law requires that it be displayed off budget. And as you know, the Budget Act expressly prohibits changes to Social Security from being part of any budget reconciliation process. And this is how it should be. Social Security is not simply a spending program. It's a pension plan sponsored by the federal government, and its assets are held in a pension trust. It has, as you know, no borrowing authority, but instead can legally pay benefits only if it has sufficient income and assets to cover the costs. Consequently, if at any point in the future it has insufficient revenue to cover the costs of benefits, those benefits will be automatically reduced without any action by Congress. As a consequence, though it can project a deficit, it can never actually run one. Though the general fund must incur costs paying interest on Treasury bonds held in trust and must, if requested, redeem those bonds, this should not be considered contributing to the deficit any more than I as an individual am contributing to the deficit if I seek repayment of Treasury bonds I hold as an individual. Social Security is projected to have a manageable shortfall still decades away. This is an issue that should be addressed in the proper forum, the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, where the expertise resides. There's no reason for haste or closed deliberations. The importance of Social Security demands that proposals receive very careful consideration. Any kind of expedited procedure behind closed doors would be a disservice to the American people. The best policy is to maintain those benefits, increase them for the most disadvantaged, and eliminate Social Security's funding gap by a few carefully crafted proposals, which are good policy in and of themselves. In my written statement, I provide such a plan. Poll after poll has consistently shown that the American people would prefer to pay more for Social Security than have those benefits reduced. In my view, this commission should defer to Congress, and Congress should follow the will of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Even though I and many people refer to this as the Deficit or Debt Commission, it is the National Commission of Fiscal Responsibility and Reform, and the President did ask us to look at this as one of our goals, so that's why we're reviewing it. Thank you.
And if I could just say, I hope that when you do, that you think about, as I say, what poll after poll has shown, because I think it's not only good politics, I think it's very wise policy. Thank you.
Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to testify before the Commission. My name is Stacy Sanders, and I am the Director of the Elder Economic Security Initiative at Wider Opportunities for Women, more commonly known as WOW. WOW works nationally and in its home community of Washington, D.C., to promote the economic well-being of women and their families. Through research, organizing, and advocacy, WOW works to promote policies and programs that will allow Americans the opportunity to be economically secure, whether by securing a job with a self-sufficient wage or by accessing critical benefits that allow seniors to age in place. Through its programs, WOW works with coalitions in nearly 40 states and represents over 2,500 advocates, providers, policymakers, administrators, and others. We recognize that the Commission is tasked with a significant challenge to reduce the federal deficit. Yet this goal ought to be considered in a broader context, that of promoting economic security for Americans of all ages. And WOW encourages the Commission to make its recommendations with this broader focus in mind, in particular paying close attention to how its suggestions will impact vulnerable groups, including low-income Americans. WOW asks that the Commission guarantee that its recommendations do not harm low-income workers, families, or elders. Keeping this broader focus in mind, of particular concern to WOW is how the Commission's recommendations will impact Social Security. And today, my comments will focus particularly on the adequacy of Social Security benefits. Although it was never intended to be the sole source of income in retirement, Social Security represents all or most of many elders' income, and this is particularly true for older women. Women who on average learn less during their working years disproportionately rely on these benefits. And in fact, 3 in 10 older adults rely on Social Security for more than 90% of their income, and 2 out of 5 older women have only Social Security. Without it, half of all seniors would live in poverty. It's important to recognize that Social Security is not only a program for retirees. Its benefits provide a lifeline for persons with disabilities and dependent survivors. More than 1.3 million children would live in poverty without Social Security. And while its success as an anti-poverty program is made clear by these statistics, WOW's Elder Economic Security Initiative provides a framework and tools that allow us to assess Social Security's success in terms of economic security. Underpinning the initiative is a tool called the Elder Index that looks at the real cost of living in retirement and incorporates the cost of housing, healthcare, transportation, food, and other essentials. In 2009, the average Social Security benefit for an older woman was just under $12,000 per year, compared to $15,600 for an older man. And our Elder Index demonstrates that a senior renter requires nearly $20,000 annually to meet their basic needs. Thus, those who rely solely or primarily on Social Security benefits must make difficult sacrifices, choosing among basic needs, including food, prescription medication, or energy bills. The Elder Index is a bare-bones measure of elder economic security, and it is nearly double the federal poverty level of $10,830 for a single older adult, which brings to light a startling reality, that far more of today's seniors are struggling to make ends meet than is represented by today's poverty rates. So today I ask that the Commission turn its attention away from Social Security and focus on the true sources of the nation's deficit,
WOW encourages the Commission to explore recommendations that will foster job growth and stimulate the economy, including building demand for consumer goods through investments in low-income support programs and investing in adult education, skill development, and job creation. These recommendations will help to ease fiscal stress and simultaneously benefit low-income populations.
Can you please wrap up?
Sure.
Thanks.
That's
Thank
it.
you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, Chairman Simpson, Chairman Bowles. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today before the National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. My name is Bill Bentley. I'm the President and CEO of Voices for America's Children, the nation's largest multi-issue children's advocacy organization with a network of 60 member organizations in 45 states, D.C., and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The network is one of the nation's leading advocates for children and youth. We care very much about the future of our country, and we applaud you for the efforts that you are undertaking right now. We know that it's difficult. We believe deeply that every child in America should have the benefit of every possible opportunity and support needed to grow up healthy, productive, educated, and ready to lead. There is no doubt that the federal budget deficit must be reduced to a level that approaches a more historical level as a percentage of the nation's economy. Children today are very much at risk. Reducing the federal budget deficit is critical, but there are other priorities that I submit are of equal challenge to the nation. Gandhi said once that poverty is the worst form of violence. Children represent 25% of the population, and yet 41% of all children live in low-income families, and nearly 1 in every 5 in poor families. The percentage of children living in low-income families, both poor and near poor, has been on the rise, increasing from 37% in 2000 to 41% in 2008. And during this time, the overall number of children of all ages increased by 3%, while the numbers who are low income and poor increased by a staggering 33%. Although Black, American Indian, and Hispanic children are disproportionately low income, white children comprise the largest group of all low-income children under age 18. And every year, there are nearly 1 million documented cases of child abuse in this country. And while health care is available to most low-income and poor children, more than 8 million children remain without coverage. There are other statistics I could quote, but I won't in the interest of time. Children are at risk in reducing deficits, especially if Social Security, Medicaid, or domestic discretionary spending is targeted, would just exacerbate an already difficult situation. As a percentage of gross domestic product, federal programs that provide a safety net to children are shrinking. And according to the Urban Institute's Kids Share analysis of federal expenditures, from 1960 to the present, outlays on children have increased in dollars and as a percentage of gross domestic product. However, children are receiving a smaller share of the overall domestic federal budget. In 2008, the largest federal spending programs for children were Medicaid, food and nutrition programs, and temporary assistance to needy families, TANF. Their report states that the Child Tax Credit, Medicaid, and Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program had particularly high expenditures in 2008 as early responses to the recession. As a downward trend is expected to continue unless current policies are altered. And should this Commission recommend a reduction in domestic discretionary spending, the decline in spending on needing children and their families will be even greater. If I can leave the members of the Commission with one thing to consider, let it be that our children are an investment, perhaps the safest investment we can make. And since the last time structural reforms of entitlement and other federal programs was seriously considered, our knowledge of how young minds develop has grown. We know that early investments in kids and their future health are very much related. We also realize that you're going to have to do something to address the deficit situation. We would only suggest that as you consider how you proceed, that you consider revenue increases as well as any deficit recommendations that you all would develop.
Thank you very much. I will tell you that when we did the balanced budget agreement in 1997, I think the proudest moment of my life was when we got health care insurance for 5 million poor kids as part of that. Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to thank, first of all, the Commission for this opportunity to speak. My name is Peter Dawson, and I represent a group of nearly 1.4 million people called 1 million plus people who disapprove of the health care bill and Speak Out America Now. Unlike the health care law, we're hoping that our voices will be heard, and we thank you for the opportunity. With $13+ trillion in national debt and another even more disturbing but rarely mentioned $43 trillion in unfunded Social Security and Medicaid liabilities, our country is on the brink of financial ruin as a result of fiscal irresponsibility on the part of our representatives in Washington on both sides of the table. Federal Chairman Bernanke has warned us. Admiral Mueller has told us that this is the biggest threat to our national security. Last week, the G20 countries have criticized us, and the CBO came out with a report today that only further supports this. We're here to ask you to do a few simple things, or what sound like common sense things. First, please stop spending money we don't have. Individual homeowners and households and state governments have to do it. It's time for the federal government to be required to produce a balanced budget each year. Secondly, tax increases are not the answer. They will stifle the recovery, cost us jobs, and cripple the future economic growth of this country. Business is already paying the second largest corporate tax rates behind Japan. Cut taxes to stimulate growth. A national sales tax will only further fuel Washington's addiction to spending. Third, we need to get serious about government waste, abuse, and fraud, i.e. we can ill afford to be spending $150,000 of stimulus money on salamander crossings in Vermont or $1.25 million on a squirrel bridge in Arizona. $782 billion of taxpayer funds were spent with little results. While I know it is fashionable in Washington to demonize business, no business would tolerate such results. Fourth, we need leaders and not politicians to make the tough decisions we sent them to Washington to make, to stop the handouts for votes and focus on prioritizing our needs based on what we can afford. That does not mean being all things to all people. Fifth, we need a permanent fix to Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, once and for all. Yes, there will be shared pain, but without addressing such, there can be no real progress in reducing our debt. No more smoke and mirrors approving reductions in fees for services that are only offset by further legislation which renders them neutral. Sixth, we need to repeal the health care law and replace it with an alternative in line with American people's desire and what we can afford. At a time when the IMF is forcing Greece to privatize its national health care and the UK is making dramatic reductions in its socialized medicine, we are embarking on a program that will cripple this country. Health and Human Services says it will not reduce costs. CBO has indicated another $115 billion in expenses, combined with the $210 billion of doctor fix that was not included and the $500 billion that will be taken from a bankrupt Medicare system. This leaves us with a deficit of $687 billion over 10 years before any unintended consequences. We fear that this bill will be catastrophic. Seventh, it's time to evaluate the Iraq and Afghanistan wars to determine whether or not we can possibly achieve the desired outcome or if there is a more efficient way to protect our nation. I thank you and wish you the fortitude to be Americans first, with party affiliation second. Choose to be leaders, not politicians. Make the tough decisions. Yes, there will be shared pain, but let our generation pay for our sins and not allow it to become the curse of our children. God bless you, and God bless America.
Let me ask a question of Ms. Altman, because I think your group has distorted what I have done. And Alex is a good man, and very persistent, charitable fellow. And your remarks early on about lame duck and doing things in secret are bizarre. No one has ever suggested that. and I want to correct that. I don't need to, but I want to. And then, as I say, I hope that as you continue to, if you do anything, that you use fairness with regard to me, and when you play your tape, play it all. And what I said was, we're trying to take care of the lesser in society. And today I've heard words like vulnerable, poor, deprived, struggling, disenfranchised, hurting, and beaten down, and those are the people I were talking about. And then to take the word lesser and look like some evil thing is totally unfair and pisses me off.
Well, let me say, first of all, I'm very happy to hear that these recommendations, there's not an agreement. What the press has reported, and I've talked to reporters who've confirmed it for me, so I guess it's wrong, that Majority Leader Reid agreed with the White House that if 14 out of 18 members of the commission reach agreement, that he will take it up in the lame duck session. And if it passes the Senate, the Speaker Pelosi has agreed to take it up in the House. If that's not true, I think it's good for you to correct the record to that, because that's what even reporters are saying. So I understand what you're saying. I worked for Senator Jack Danforth when I was on the Hill. I try to be an honorable person and follow his lead. I believe that Alex was simply asking questions and being very polite. I don't think he was.
He's a good egg. I don't argue with what he does.
And we put the entire.
Don't take the word lesser and keep using it as if you have, others have.
No, I have not. We
Tired.
played the tape and others picked it up. I did not. I understand what you're saying.
I've been around a long time. I get tired of a lot of things.
I assure you, I've heard Senator Simpson speak on this subject several times, and he didn't mean anything derogatory by it at all. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If the next group would come up, please.
Well, which seat should I pick here?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Heidi Hartman. I'm an economist with a PhD in economics from Yale University. I also have a MacArthur Fellowship, and I'm a member of the National Academy of Socialist Insurance. I'm testifying today as the president of the think tank I founded, the Institute for Women's Policy Research. Unfortunately, I was alphabetized under women instead of under institute. So here I am, but I have the whole table to myself, so I guess I'm lucky in that regard. I'm also testifying as the Secretary-Treasurer of the National Council of Women's Organizations, which is the coalition group of over 200 women's organizations that represents more than 10 million women. And I have copies of my written testimony, which I'd love to give to you because I think it's just easier, especially at this time of day, if I just summarize it. So I'm focusing strictly on Social Security, and I want to argue that it would be a mistake to cut Social Security benefits in any way, shape, or form at this time in our history of the United States. I'm especially interested and concerned about women, and I know that you know most of this, but just to make sure we're clear about it, Social Security provides a critical income source for women. They receive benefits both as workers and as the spouses or widows of workers. And those benefits are incredibly important to them because there are still women who do not qualify for their own worker benefits. You have to have worked essentially 10 years. And I have friends that haven't qualified for that. I'm telling them, look, go get a job anywhere, Walmart, I don't care, just get your 10 years, and they're not doing it. So it's about 13% of women who do not qualify now for their own worker benefits. And some women, even those who work, most women who work, do not earn as much as men. The average today is 75% if you work full-time year-round. Most women do not work full-time year-round. They work fewer hours. They take years off. We did a study which showed that over a 15-year period, almost a third of women had taken at least 4 years off during that 15-year period, compared to only 4% of men. So that's quite a disparity, and of course it's because women do the caregiving. And the spousal benefits, the widow's benefits, the survivor benefits, of course they're equally available to men, but men do not take advantage of them. Why don't men take advantage of them? Well, because they earn more than their wives, and they don't take as much time off. So they're always going to do better under their own worker benefit than they will under their wife's benefit. So when you add it all up, the 7 million adults who are getting Social Security benefits, 51% of the women get a family benefit. They're taking advantage of that spousal or survivor benefit, more than half of women, 51% of women when you look at women of all ages, and only 1.3% of men. Now, there would be a way to fix this situation. We could have completely equal pay between men and women, and we could have men and women taking off equal amounts of time to stay home with children or care for elderly parents or whatever. But that's not the situation we have. If men and women were completely equal, then they would be equally availing themselves of these spousal benefits. It might still be that families would choose to have one person specialize in home and another person specialize in work, but it wouldn't always be the woman who specializes in home. And because it is, these benefits are incredibly important to women. And yet, I always hear that it's the spousal benefits that are easy to get rid of. That's a good way to save money. Let's just get rid of them, and let's not, substitute anything else. So I just wanted to point out exactly how many women it is. These figures are from the Social Security Administration Annual Statistical Supplement. Exactly how many women it is that are dependent on these benefits. If we look just at retired worker benefits.
Can you try to wrap up, please, ma'am?
Oh, okay. All right. So then let me turn to one thing. Over time, women have become less dependent on spousal benefits and family benefits by about 4%. It used to be 38% who took benefits as workers only. Now it's 44%. So that is changing. But because of this dependence, I think it's just absolutely critical that we not think about cutting these benefits. And I do want to just let you know, as an officer of the National Council of Women's Organizations, that most of the women's groups are opposed to any cuts in benefits. And we would argue that essentially, if you're looking at Social Security as a way to solve the deficit problem, the National Commission is basically barking up the wrong tree. As we heard today in Doug Elmendorf's presentation, Social Security is a very small part of even the long-run budget deficit, and it's certainly not any part of the budget deficit right now, and it never has contributed to the national debt. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.